Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving into the world of Netflix.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, but not for the shows this time.
All right.
We're looking at their company culture,
Interesting.
as detailed in No Rules Rules, Netflix, and the Culture of Reinvention
Right.
by Hastings and Erin Meyer.
Okay.
You've provided this book as source material for this deep dive, so
Yeah.
let's get into it. No Rules Rules.
Yeah.
It's really a fascinating look at how Netflix built its unconventional, wildly successful culture.
Yes. Hastings really challenges the traditional corporate rule book in this book.
Totally.
He makes the case that a company built on freedom and responsibility,
Okay.
where employees are given a great deal of autonomy and trusted to act in the company's best interests, is the key to unlocking both agility and innovation.
So the book kind of delves into a few major themes, like
Yeah.
building a dream team of high-performing colleagues,
Right.
creating a culture of radical honesty and candor, and ditching traditional policies like vacation time and expense approvals. Hastings argues that this approach empowers employees to make smart decisions and learn from their mistakes, all while leading with context, not control.
It is important to remember, though, that Hastings and Meyer emphasize that this isn't a system you can just drop into any company.
Right.
They argue that it's built on a foundation of high talent density,
Yeah.
radical honesty, and constant learning from both successes and failures.
So the book really lays this all out in order, starting with the importance of building a team of what they call stunning colleagues.
Yes.
And this is where the infamous keeper test comes in, right?
Exactly. The keeper test is a core part of Netflix's approach to talent density.
Okay.
It's a performance management system where managers are constantly evaluating their team members by asking themselves one question. If this person told me they were leaving for a similar job at a peer company, would I fight hard to keep them?
And if the answer is no, they show them the door.
Essentially, yes. Though they are let go with a generous severance package.
Got it.
This might seem harsh, but Hastings argues that keeping only keepers on the team is essential to maintaining a high-performance culture.
Right.
He often uses the analogy of a sports team. To win a championship, you need the absolute best players on the field.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a different approach than what we see at many companies,
Right.
where there's more of a we're a family vibe.
Yeah.
Hastings seems to believe that keeping underperformers, even if they're nice people,
Yeah.
ultimately hurts the entire team.
He does, and he even cites studies in the book showing how even one underperforming person can negatively impact the output of an entire team.
Wow.
It's almost like a virus, he argues, where mediocrity can spread if it's not addressed.
Okay, so once you have this incredible team of A players, the next step seems to be creating an environment where they can thrive. And that's where radical honesty comes in.
Yes.
Hastings is a big believer in open and candid feedback, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right.
There's that memorable story early in the book where he talks about getting some pretty blunt feedback about his presentation style
Oh, yeah.
from a colleague right in the middle of a talk.
Yes. In front of an audience.
Yeah?
It's a great example of what Netflix calls sunshining.
Okay.
The idea is to bring mistakes and failures out into the open, discuss them honestly, and learn from them.
Interesting.
Hastings argues that trying to hide mistakes or sweep them under the rug is ultimately more damaging in the long run.
That's a fascinating concept, but
Yeah.
I can imagine that level of honesty being pretty hard to stomach for some people. Could this kind of culture work in every company?
Well,
Imagine telling your boss their idea was terrible right to their face.
Hastings acknowledges that this level of candor isn't for everyone.
Right.
And that it needs to be done in a constructive way.
Okay.
Netflix has specific guidelines for giving feedback effectively.
I see.
They call it the 4 A's. Feedback should aim to assist, be actionable, show appreciation, and allow the recipient to accept or decline the feedback.
Okay, so it's not just about being brutally honest for the sake of it.
Right.
There's a method to the madness.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of trust where people feel comfortable sharing their opinions and ideas, even if they're critical. This is especially important when it comes to decision-making.
Yeah.
Hastings believes that the best decisions are made when you have a diversity of viewpoints and everyone feels empowered to speak up.
Speaking of decisions,
Yes.
one of the most radical aspects of the Netflix culture is their approach to freedom and responsibility.
Okay.
When it comes to things like vacation time and expenses, they literally have no vacation policy and no expense approval process.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
How does that even work?
That's right. It's one of the things that initially drew a lot of attention to Netflix's culture.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it goes back to the core principle of freedom and responsibility. Netflix trusts its employees to manage their own time and expenses within the context of the company's goals and values.
But isn't that a recipe for chaos?
Right.
Wouldn't people just take advantage of the system?
That's what many people assume, but Netflix has actually found the opposite to be true.
Hmm.
They've found that people tend to be more responsible when they feel trusted.
That's interesting.
And by eliminating all the bureaucracy around vacation requests and expense reports, they free up employees to focus on what really matters, their work.
I guess it makes sense. If you feel like you're being micromanaged, you're less likely to be motivated to go above and beyond.
Exactly. And this lack of micromanagement is a key part of what Hastings calls leading with context, not control.
Okay.
He believes that the best way to empower employees is to give them a clear understanding of the company's goals, priorities, and the risks involved, and then trust them to make the right decisions.
Okay, so it's like giving them a map and a compass instead of turn-by-turn directions.
Ooh, that's a great analogy. It's about setting the stage and then letting your team figure out the how.
And you see this context, not control philosophy playing out in all sorts of ways at Netflix.
Yeah.
From how they approve expenses to how they make multi-million-dollar content acquisition decisions.
That's right. And probably one of the most memorable examples from the book is the story of Mighty Little Beam,
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
where a junior employee in India made a multi-million-dollar decision to purchase the cartoon series without any high-level approvals.
That story is wild. A junior employee making a decision that big.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happens when you empower people with context and trust them to act in the best interest of the company.
Exactly. And it paid off big time. Mighty Little Beam became a global hit for Netflix, proving that sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected places.
Right.
But this doesn't mean it was a perfect journey for Netflix as they grew.
Of course not.
They did encounter challenges, especially when it came to taking this unique culture global.
Right. We can get into that more after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive into no rules rules.
So as we were saying before, taking this unique culture global definitely presented some challenges for Netflix.
Right. Even within the United States, you have regional differences in communication styles and work culture.
Yeah.
So imagine trying to do that on a global scale.
Exactly. And the book dives into some of the specific challenges Netflix faced as it expanded internationally.
Yeah.
For example, the concept of radical honesty and sunshining doesn't always translate well across cultures.
Yeah.
In some cultures, direct feedback is seen as disrespectful or even confrontational.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What might be considered constructive criticism in one culture could be perceived as a personal attack in another.
Precisely. And Netflix learned this lesson the hard way through some early missteps.
Oh, really?
They share a story in the book about an American executive who gave very direct feedback to a Japanese colleague.
Okay.
And it backfired spectacularly. The feedback was intended to be helpful, but it was perceived as rude and insensitive.
So how did Netflix address this? Did they have to water down their culture to make it more palatable to different cultures?
Not exactly. They realized that they needed to adapt their approach to giving and receiving feedback to be more culturally sensitive.
Got it.
So they added a fifth A to their 4A feedback model.
Interesting.
It's now called the 5A model, and that fifth A stands for adapt.
Adapt. I like that. So it's about acknowledging that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to communication and feedback.
Right.
And that you need to be flexible and adapt your style based on the cultural context.
That's exactly right. And it goes beyond just the words you use.
Okay.
It's about understanding the nuances of nonverbal communication, tone of voice, and even the way feedback is delivered. In some cultures, for example, it's more appropriate to give feedback in private, while in others, it's perfectly acceptable to do so in a group setting.
It sounds like building a truly global company requires a deep understanding of cultural differences and a willingness to adapt.
Yeah.
But it's not just about avoiding offense.
Yeah.
Right? It's about ensuring that the feedback is actually effective in achieving its goal.
You're right. The ultimate goal of feedback is to help people improve and grow. So if your feedback isn't being received in the way it was intended, it's not going to be effective.
So this adapt piece is a constant work in progress, even for a company like Netflix that's made cultural sensitivity a priority.
Definitely.
It seems like they're always learning and evolving.
Definitely. And this commitment to learning and growth is woven throughout the entire no rules philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being open to feedback, willing to experiment, and constantly striving to improve.
It's almost like they embrace the messiness of growth and recognize that there will be bumps along the way.
Yes. And that's one of the things that makes this book so refreshing. It doesn't offer a cookie-cutter approach to building a successful company culture.
Right.
It's more about providing a set of principles and then encouraging readers to adapt them to their own unique context.
And one of those core principles that we've touched on but haven't fully explored yet is this idea of leading with context, not control.
Yes.
Can you expand on that a bit more? What does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. Leading with context is all about empowering your employees by giving them the information they need to make good decisions without micromanaging them.
Okay.
It's about setting clear expectations, outlining the goals and priorities, and then trusting your team to figure out the how.
So it's about giving them the map and the compass instead of turn-by-turn directions, as we had discussed earlier.
That's a great analogy. And this approach is reflected in everything from how Netflix handles expenses to how they make big content acquisition decisions.
Right, like that incredible story about the junior employee in India who made a multi-million-dollar decision to purchase Mighty Little Beam without any high-level approvals.
Yes, that story is a perfect illustration of leading with context. The employee had a deep understanding of Netflix's goals for international expansion. Their focus on high-quality animation and their willingness to take big bets on content. So even though he was relatively junior, he had the context he needed to make a bold decision.
And it turned out to be a brilliant decision. Mighty Little Beam was a huge success for Netflix.
It was. And that success is a testament to the power of leading with context.
Yeah.
When you empower your people with information and trust them to make good decisions, amazing things can happen.
But it doesn't mean that every decision will be a home run, right? There must have been times when this approach backfired.
Of course. No system is perfect.
Right.
But even when mistakes are made, Netflix views them as opportunities for learning and growth.
Okay.
They encourage their employees to sunshine their failures, to talk openly about what went wrong and what they learned from the experience.
That's a pretty radical concept,
Right.
and most companies, people try to hide their mistakes for fear of being punished.
I know. But Hastings argues that creating a culture where it's safe to fail is essential for innovation.
That's interesting.
He even shares a story in the book about his own massive blunder with the Quickster debacle.
Oh, yeah. When they tried to split the DVD business from streaming,
Right.
that was a PR nightmare.
It was. And Hastings takes full responsibility for the mistake in the book.
Good for him.
He explains how he failed to adequately farm for dissent, which is a process of actively seeking out different perspective before making a major decision.
So instead of trying to sweep it under the rug, he used it as a learning opportunity for the entire company.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes this book so valuable.
Okay.
It's not just a theoretical treatise on management. It's full of real-world examples, both successes and failures, that illustrate the principles of no rules, rules in action.
I'm curious, though. Do you think this radical no-rules approach can really work in every industry or company culture?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I don't think there's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Hastings himself acknowledges that this approach isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
He specifically mentions that in certain industries like those where safety is paramount,
Okay.
a more traditional rule-based approach is absolutely necessary.
That makes sense. You can't exactly give people freedom and responsibility when lives are at stake.
Right. But I do think that the principles of no rules can be adapted and applied to a wide range of contexts.
Okay.
It's about finding the right balance between freedom and responsibility, trust and accountability,
Yeah.
and adapting the approach to fit the specific needs of your organization and industry.
So it's not about throwing out all the rules.
No.
It's about being thoughtful and intentional about which rules you keep,
Yeah.
which rules you discard, and how you create a culture that empowers your people to do their best work.
Exactly. And that's what makes this book so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It challenges us to question the status quo and to imagine new possibilities for the future of work.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into no rules rules, I think the question on everyone's mind is this.
Yeah.
Is the Netflix model replicable? Could this radical approach work in other industries or companies?
Well, you know what they say, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And while there isn't an easy answer, what new rules does so brilliantly is push us to confront the limitations of those traditional management styles and consider the potential of a more agile and innovative future of work.
It's really about challenging the status quo, questioning deeply ingrained assumptions about how companies should operate, and exploring new ways to unlock that human potential.
And even if every part of the Netflix approach doesn't resonate with you, this book offers a powerful framework for rethinking how we work and building organizations that are truly fit for the future.
So whether you're a CEO, a manager, or even an individual contributor, No Rules
Yeah.
provides a wealth of insights and things that will make you think, which will stay with you long after you finish the last page.
It's definitely a must-read for anyone who's passionate about building a better, more human-centered workplace.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into No Rules Rules. We hope you've enjoyed this journey, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and maybe think about how you might apply them to your own work and life. Thanks for joining us.